Good evening and welcome. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for a really special discussion with three wonderful and accomplished guests, Sara Patton, Pat Ford, and LeeAnne Beres. Before diving into our discussion, I want to start with a few comments. First of which I'll say is that we are recording tonight, and all of the webinars in this series will be recorded and then made available on our website and our YouTube, Save Our Wild Salmon's YouTube channel soon after we hold them. My name is Joseph Bogart. I'm the Executive Director of the Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition. SOS is 30 years old this year. We're a coalition of conservation organizations, commercial and sport fishing associations, orca and clean energy advocates working together to protect and restore fishable populations of salmon and steelhead in the Columbia Snake Rivers for the benefit of people, fish and wildlife, and ecosystems. The Columbia Basin was once the most productive salmon landscape on the planet. Our education, organizing, outreach, and policy work focuses mainly on protecting and restoring the freshwater habitats these fish need to survive and restore themselves. Since the 1990s, we've pursued two main goals. First, to secure for near-term or immediate operational changes at the dams and reservoirs, increase spill mainly, to improve survival for fish as they migrate to and from the ocean. Second, beginning in 1998, to restore a freely flowing Lower Snake River, the Columbia River's largest and historically most salmon productive tributary. This is our first webinar in a three-part series this fall, and you can learn more about the other two webinars on our website. Briefly, on November 4, we'll have a discussion with three community leaders based in Northeast Oregon to talk about these sort of underrepresented or sort of lower profile part of the Snake River Basin. And we'll focus in on its history, people, lands, and waters. And many years of community-based work to protect and restore salmon, steelhead, and their habitats in this area. Then on November 18th, we'll hear stories from three renowned salmon scientists / managers with many decades of experience in the trenches of salmon restoration research, policy, and politics. I want to share a few logistics about this evening's discussion. The four of us, I think, have blocked out 2 hours for this evening. We've set an agenda for roughly 90 minutes, a mix of conversation, first led by our speakers, followed by Q&A with all of you. And we can spill beyond those 90 minutes if the conversation continues and there's interest. The chat box should be available for you to use this evening, and questions can be submitted through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as well. Let's see, I want to thank my colleague, Carrie Herman, who's working behind the scenes tonight, and Martha Campos, accompanying her for their help and support to organize and support this webinar this evening and the series this fall. If technical problems do arise and that you think we can be helpful with, you can reach out to Carrie this evening in real time at carrie@wildsalmon.org, and Martha, and her email address is martha88campos, CAMPOS @gmail.com, and hopefully they can be helpful. But hopefully we won't have any problems. Now, sort of turning to this evening's discussion, I want to welcome Sara and Pat and LeeAnne and thank them. Thank you all for sharing your time with us tonight. I'm personally really excited about this conversation, as we have known and worked with each other at least since the 90s. I think Pat and Sara may go back a bit further. But we've worked together in varying relationships and contexts. And for me, each of you is a friend and a colleague and a mentor. And I've learned so much from you and continue to do so. So thank you for that. The title of tonight's webinar is Getting to Yes, the Long Walk to Restoring the Lower Snake River. And for me, this title communicates both a sense of optimism, which is warranted today, and a hard truth about the sustained and difficult work that's been undertaken by many people over many years, including our three guests tonight, and the fact that there's still plenty of hard work ahead. And now, before we get started, I want to acknowledge one significant development that occurred today, a very positive coincidence concerning the court case that has been at the center of this controversy for many years. And I won't go into great detail now, but a joint request was made by the parties to the litigation, the Nez Perce tribe, the state of Oregon, conservation and fishing plaintiffs led by Earth Justice, and the Biden administration, an agreement by all to river and dam operation in the lower Columbia, lower Snake Rivers in 2022, so the upcoming migration year, and a request for a pause in the current litigation to allow these parties to work over the next 8 months to develop and implement a comprehensive plan to protect and restore Columbia snake salmon, and to comply with the law, something that hasn't occurred for many, many years in this case. And this is a big deal and an essential step if we're going to develop and deliver a regional solution. Needless to say, this comes as the result of a lot of hard work by so many in the courtroom, but also out of the courtroom, including many of you on this call tonight. And I'll just sort of highlight in particular the visionary, relentless, and won't take no for an answer leadership of the Nez Perce tribe and many other Northwest tribes to bring this about. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'm sure we'll dive into it more later. And let's get started. Pat, I might start with you, and then Sarah, and then LeeAnne, just in turn. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your work experiences, how you were drawn into this work, and sort of how salmon fit, or what salmon mean to you.
I will try, Joseph. Thank you. I was raised in Idaho Falls, Idaho. I went to New York City for college. I came back to Idaho after that, and I sort of hid for 6, 7, 8 years. Wandered around in my mind. And then I fell into conservation. I got a job with the Idaho Conservation League. This is in 1977. A year and a half later, I was its executive director. I worked for ICL until 1984. I took a break for various purposes. And then in 1990-91, I got involved in what became the founding of the Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition. Worked for it for pay from, I think, 1991 through 2013. Retired in 2013, and so now I work on salmon for no pay rather than getting paid. Advantages and disadvantages to that. Let's see, I live in Boise with my wife, Julia Page, who's upstairs now, and very close to my 2 daughters, Lee and Annie, and to two of Lee's 2 kids, my grandchildren, Max and Danica. I was drawn to salmon because I needed to learn about the Northwest. I was suddenly in conservation. I didn't know much. Salmon were obviously something that connected to so many other different things: energy, tribes, water, Alaska, you name it. In the conservation world in the Northwest, there's a connection to salmon. And that's what drew me, was that chance to learn and to try to be helpful. And it became my career.
Okay, Joseph, want me to jump in?
That'd be great.
Okay. Okay, Sara Patton. I got involved in clean energy pretty much by accident. I was planning to be involved in social justice after I got my law degree from Antioch School of Law. But I got offered a job doing energy conservation at Seattle City Light, which seemed in 1978, which seemed a challenge. it turned out to be a challenge, and it turned out to have a lot of important aspects of helping low-income people with energy bills and with energy issues. So there was a social justice component there. And so I stayed and kept doing that, energy efficiency primarily, from 1978 until 1993, when I went to work for the Energy Coalition. And the Energy Coalition does energy efficiency, but also renewables, also focuses heavily on low income issues and salmon, especially fish and wildlife harmed by electricity in various ways. And I got involved in salmon to a large extent because Michael Risotto, who was then the executive director of Save Our Wild Salmon, lured me in, and because it was something new. I knew quite a bit about energy efficiency. I knew a lot about the low income issues with energy, and I knew about renewables, but I didn't know anything really about salmon. And so suddenly there I was, learning a great deal fast, paddling as hard as I could. And it was fascinating, of course. I think that so I continued to be the Northwest Energy Coalition representative to the Save Our Wild Salmon Board for 22 odd years, and retired in 2015. And so as with Pat, I'm now working on clean and affordable energy, including salmon for free. So that's good. And the big issues that I'm hoping we'll get to, the importance of coalition in this campaign, the importance of a sense of humor and a thick skin, and the importance of persistence. So those are the issues that I'm hoping we'll get to. LeeAnne.
All right, hi everybody, I'm LeeAnne Beres, and I started to come into the salmon world from fish. That's my background. I have a biology degree from Whitman College over in Walla Walla and a master's here from the University of Washington in Marine Fisheries Management. And I got my start in my career working as a fisheries biologist on board commercial fishing boats up in the Bering Sea of Alaska. And really just cut my teeth literally hip deep in fish, and learned a lot primarily about offshore fisheries. But like Pat said, when you live in the Northwest, salmon's where it's at, right? And so as a young whippersnapper, after working for other organizations, including the Marine Fish Conservation Network, I got my start in salmon in 1994 as the Washington field organizer for Save Our Wild Salmon. Then Sara Patton stole me away to become the outreach director of the Northwest Energy Coalition for 5 years, working on coalition issues and energy issues, like she said. And then Pat stole me back to Save Our Wild Salmon, where I was the associate director for 5 years, from 2000 to 2005. And then I became the executive director of a faith-based organization, Earth Ministry, where I spent the next 16 years working on salmon issues from a moral and spiritual perspective. And that's the piece that really draws me in now. I came from the science, but to me, you know, it's the importance of salmon to the people of the Northwest. It's part of the fabric of who we are. If you're familiar with the author Timothy Egan, you know, he famously described the Northwest as any place the salmon can get to. And they're just woven into the economic and the cultural and ecological and spiritual significance of this region, specifically also for our Northwest Native tribes. And I do want to stop and take a moment and just acknowledge the fact that I'm speaking to you from Seattle, Washington, which is the traditional land of the Duwamish tribe and other Coast Salish nations. And it's that time immemorial of the first peoples of this land who have tended this resource, tended to the spiritual significance of the salmon, and how, you know, that grounding has spread through all of the other people of the Northwest. So no matter whether you're a sport fisherman or a commercial fisherman or a conservationist or a pastor, we all feel that pull of the salmon, and that's what keeps me motivated and keeps me working on this issue still 27 years later.
Great. Thank you all, and welcome, and thank you again for being here. I want to start the conversation from here. Pat, ask you to sort of set the stage a little bit. You've all been involved in this work, salmon recovery work in the Columbia Basin, since the 90s or earlier. Pat, if you could sort of set the stage a little bit around the origins of this conflict, controversy, fight that we as a region have been involved in for so long. What was happening? I guess if you could say a few things about what preceded the first listing of salmon in the Columbia Basin, anywhere in the nation really, which was Snake River sockeye in 91 or so. What was sort of happening in advance of that, and then we'll talk sort of what precipitated afterwards. But help set the stage.
I'll give it a shot. I have notes in front of me, so if my eyes go up and down, that's why. So I'm going to simplify horribly and leave out much more than I include. This is a personal slice into Joseph's question. It is not the history or the slice by any means. Salmon world is a very big world. Work to restore Columbia Basin and Snake River Basin salmon has gone on it started long ago. It's going to continue long after the lower Snake River dams are removed. We're all in a continuum of conservation and cultural action that revolves around salmon. If you live in the Northwest, that's how I view a lot of conservation and culture is revolving around those fish. From my retrospective, there were two big things happening in the Northwest salmon world that affected me as I entered it in the late 70s and 80s. These are happening Northwest wide, but also on the Columbia Snake, which is where I'll focus. The first and biggest one, salmon were going away. They were disappearing. They were declining. It was bad times for salmon. We're used to that by now, but it was a little newer then. That crisis got an awful lot of people stirred up for good reason. One piece of it that I was close to, given Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition, was the widespread suffering and alarm that it brought in tribal and sport fishing and commercial fishing circles and communities built on that fishing. There was a lot more fishing in this region and a lot more built on it then than there is now. That's a sad thing, but it's true. It led in that community, those salmon people, to an awful lot of hard fights with each other about who gets to catch the fish, should any fish be caught at all, etc. It was tough. There were some pretty bitter discussions on those issues in the early board meetings of Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition. But it also led to a practical recognition among a lot of those folks, enough to get something going, that combatants on who catches what salmon or how many get caught, we're going to have to work together and figure out how to do it, or we were going to lose salmon. We just didn't have enough power separately. And there was a list of things where, we had to work together or we were going to lose. And one of those things was dam operations on the Columbia and Snake River. And that became the special focus of the Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition. The take home for me, as I think about now, and the moment we're in now, is that disparate and often disagreeing groups had no choice. We had to work together or we were doomed. The fish that all of us cared about for different reasons were doomed. So we had to build common ground and we had to build common power or we were going to fail. I think that's a really good, solid principle for today. Build power and build common ground, and the circles get wider and the power gets bigger and the we gets bigger and so on and so forth. We join together and we build outward. Today's specific circumstances are different. I think we see in Mike Simpson's legislative concept, for instance, an effort very analogous to what I was in the middle of in helping form SOS, much broader, but analogous. How can people and interests who have argued with each other for decades over important things be drawn together in action, not on everything, salmon, but on enough to halt an extinction of Snake River salmon and steelhead and Columbia salmon and steelhead? That's the same question I and the early people in SOS were asking ourselves. And he's asking it now in a different and bigger context. And now I'll sort of grievously simplify the second big thing that was happening at that time. And it is that Northwest tribes were in the process of achieving legal co-management of salmon harvest and legal rights to large parts of that harvest, of the harvestable surplus, up to 50%. This was driven by court decisions. The Bolt decision was in 1974, where there were some others. At the same time as that was happening, the tribes were starting to really build their scientific muscle, their technical, their policy muscle in institutions within individual tribes and across various tribes. This was a time of great resistance among many in the fishing communities, groups that ended, some of them ended up in Save Our Wild Salmon later. There were some bitter fights, there was some violence. It was a bit tough, but the tribes persevered. As regards dams at that time, the tribes were on the road to becoming big players, but Bonneville and the Army Corps and the private dam owners were still firmly in charge and not doing well by salmon at all. Just as one white conservation professional who got started in that period, at the same time, I sort of simultaneously saw this rising tribal presence and power. Two, sought to ally with it on what I was working on, which was to change Columbia snake dams and eventually remove some. And third, I failed to really grasp how much, at the time, how much it would change in law and science and policy and politics over time. I was both interested and engaged for good self-interested organizational interest reasons and a bit oblivious to what was really happening. I think most relevant to the current moment is that tribal influence over federal dam operations as they affect salmon is at the highest level it's ever been. It's at a quite high level in science, in law, in policy, in politics. And in my view, their power on this is larger than the combined power of the SOS groups at the moment. But together, we're a pretty big force. And obviously we have to be bigger than we are, but that's a real good start. And I'll just quickly close with the Endangered Species Act. There was a series of actions, or you can call it a single act, that really drew those two things together, those two big threads I just talked about. In the 1980s, some salmon people, tribal and otherwise, started talking about using the Endangered Species Act in the face of implacable politics, dismal conditions for salmon, and the increasingly evident failure of the 1980 Northwest Power Act to deliver anything valuable for salmon. When the first petition was filed by the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, 1991, others were already in preparation, mostly by non-native sources, and were filed then quickly after it. And I think that's the door, that period when so many petitions were filed, and then 1 to 2 years later, so many listings occurred. That's the door that opened through which we are now walking. It was an act of combat. It stirred up a lot of people and a lot of power in this region, but it was necessary given the crisis level for salmon we were in and the near complete, get lost of the federal dam agencies. I'm simplifying, but I think that's a good summary of it. It was also an act of collaboration in that it triggered this whole period of organizing across salmon constituencies to unify and build more power. And we would lose without that power. So I hope that power is in good shape today. It seems to me it is, and poised to get higher, because that's what'll happen. It's really good to see that today's alliance, which could go on in a list, but tribal, fishing, conservation, civic, faith, business, clean energy, community, many other organizations and interests, that alliance is foreshadowed in the ESA petitions 30 years ago and what immediately followed from them. There's a track there. I think that's a nice thing to have that track and have it be a growing track. The we has gotten bigger, and the we has to get bigger still, but the we is in a good place to get bigger.
Thanks, Pat. Sarah, LeeAnne, additional thoughts around the origins of this, and Sarah, Pat talked a little bit about collaboration. I just wanted to see if you had any additional thoughts around that, since you mentioned that in your opening statement.
Well, I wanted to say about the importance of coalition, and Pat kind of touched on it, that part of what Save Our Wild Salmon was able to do for years now is to resolve conflicts, so that the folks who want salmon to come back and are willing to put their reputations and their lives on the line, basically, to make that happen, have to be able to work together and resolve those questions. And one of the stories that we talked about when we were preparing for this webinar was a critical meeting at Boise State University in about 1994 or 5. Do you think, Pat, was that it?
I'd say 96, but it was
96. Okay, good. And what had happened was that a good deal of the Idaho, both fishing and conservation groups, had decided that the science was going to say, it hadn't quite said it yet, but it was going to say that we needed to take out the dams, the 4 lower snake dams, if we were going to have a chance just to bring the salmon back. At that point, the other conservation groups and other fishing groups had a complicated increased spill, lowering of the reservoirs, and a complicated plan that we were pushing as a reasonable alternative. And so the question became at this Boise State meeting, how are we going to handle the fact that a bunch of the members of the coalition were going to go for dam removal and the other ones were not? At that point, in many battles and in many campaigns, frequently you have a schism, and you have the one group calling the other group outrageous radicals, and the other one saying that that it's the sellouts. And what happened at that meeting, in which I give great credit to Pat, who did a masterful job of running it. What happened at that meeting was a decision that the Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition would not do that. We would stay together. We would not marginalize each other. We would not, do that classic schism situation, and we did not. And I was my organization was definitely on the side of, let's figure out a way to do this with spill and so on and so forth. And we were like, well, okay, we'll look more reasonable, but we won't marginalize. We won't call the Idaho groups radicals or anything like that. And so we stayed together, and of course, we were lucky because the Idaho groups were right. But those moments when you have to keep everybody together and figure out who cares about what and talk through the issues, those are incredibly important. And they're why coalition works. If you put the effort in, and it's a lot of effort. LeeAnne was talking about when we were talking about this earlier, she was talking about the fact that the Northwest Energy Coalition, we went on an outreach tour to all the utility members of the coalition when the coalition was dealing with this issue. And that's the kind of thing where you actually go out and talk to people where they are, that you can find, you can get through those potential pivot points, those potential schism points, I should call them. So that's been incredibly important, and I'd like to turn it over to LeeAnne to see if she has something to say about that.
That's exactly the point I was going to make, Sarah, because several years later, after SOS had taken the formal position to support dam removal, we went through exactly the same thing at the Energy Coalition. And
Exactly.
we had utility members and energy producers that have dams of their own. And it was very much a hotly contested topic. And we also had, as she said, low-income protection organizations that, you know, felt like they didn't have a huge stake in fish issues. They were there because they wanted to, you know, provide utility bill assistance to low-income customers, because the Northwest Energy Coalition has a big tent. And again, it was the power of coalition in understanding the interconnectedness of all of these issues that really pushed us through what was a difficult time. And, you know, part of that was, you know, doing the prep work and understanding what the very real question concerns that, you know, these organizations and people in them would have. And showing the science as it came out, showing, you know, the Energy Coalition did a whole report on energy replacement from the lower Snake River dams, the first in the region, to show that not only could we remove the dams, we could do it and replace the energy with clean, renewable power. So, you know, having that information was key, but it was also the relationships, you know, knowing that both in Save Our Wild Salmon and in the Northwest Energy Coalition, these were people who had worked together, been through the wars together on other issues, and had that element of trust to understand that even if they didn't agree in this moment, that there was good faith, and that ultimately, you know, by seeing the interconnectedness of energy and salmon and all these other issues, that the decision was made and we moved forward.
Thanks, LeeAnne. Yeah, Northwest Energy Coalition's role of leadership throughout this campaign is, you know, it was just essential. And, you know, sort of kudos to you, Sarah, you, LeeAnne, and many others for navigating that difficult landscape. I want to turn to litigation. So the listing started in '91. There's 13 populations in the Columbia Basin that are at risk of extinction today. All 4 stocks in the Snake River are threatened or endangered. There's an asterisk next to that, which I won't dive into right now, which is coho, which there's been some positive developments in that. I think largely due to the leadership and amazing work of the Nez Perce tribe, but we'll hold off for now. Sarah, you're a lawyer. You've been a plaintiff in this case when you were executive director of Northwest Energy Coalition. Can you just spend a couple minutes talking about the sort of the role of the litigation in this fight, why it's why it's important, and what its impact has been?
I think without the litigation, we would never have gotten this far. I mean, the litigation is absolutely critical. Thank God for Earth Justice. Thank God for Todd True and our Steve Mashuda, who have been doing yeoman's work for 20 years now, it seems like. So that is, we would never have gotten the attention. We would never have gotten this far without the litigation. That said, it's been incredibly frustrating with one of the judges, Judge Redden, ruled for the plaintiffs, and that's our side of the argument, 4 times, and said, yes, this plan that you federal government have proposed is inadequate, arbitrary, and capricious, because they did not deal with the hydro system at all, the plans. And so the judge would say, this is no good, start over again. And the federal family would go back and do another plan, which then the judge would say, this is no good, start over again. That got a little frustrating, as you can imagine. But we won, and it meant that every time, it meant that the federal family couldn't ignore us. We were engaged. And we could continue to organize around that. So I think the litigation, we're all tired of the litigation. The news today that there's a pause in the litigation was, I'm sure there were people all over the region who went, because it's been so long and so hard and seemingly so difficult. But if we were not in there and winning, we would have been, salmon would be gone by now, I think. So that's my litigation story. Not terribly legalistic, but there you go.
LeeAnne or Pat?
Well, the One, to point out that this core litigation, which has been going on for so long, that we would not have won it or used litigation as effectively we had without Oregon and the Nez Perce tribe. Earlier, a number of other tribes, but since 2008, I believe, the Nez Perce tribe as co-plaintiffs. Their presence helped the judge make the proper decision in ways that our presence as conservation and fishing groups abetted, but was not necessarily going to bring to the table ourselves. And the second thing is that, I mean, you know, there was just no choice. If the federal dam agencies had been willing to listen, to talk, to consider that maybe part of their mission ought to be helping keep salmon around in the Northwest, if there were avenues for working with the parties responsible for a lot of the death, a lot of the slaughter, human-caused death, but those avenues weren't there. Those agencies were riding high, and they were not interested in the little people talking salmon. We had to get bigger, and we had to get bolder, and so we did.
The litigation has been critical over time for stopping bad plans, and eventually, starting I think in 2004, the imposition of injunctive relief in the form of spill. Maybe this is sort of a transition to you know, Pat, you could start and just, you know, the litigation being critical for you know, holding people accountable, but also sort of in the near term, starting to deliver some consequences to the agencies who resisted at every turn. Can you just talk a little bit about the sort of, you know, your views on the science, which grew over time and then, you know, sort of played itself out in various ways, including spill?
I'll try. Another complex subject that I have to simplify. What I want to focus on is the interplay of science with politics. So not about science per se, it's the interplay of science with politics, litigation, building power, building coalition power, building people power, all those other elements. And I'll use the example of salmon spill. This is our biggest success so far, and it is a big success. It's step by step over the years via injunction and via settlements with the feds when they were of a mood. But we have increased survivals of Snake and Columbia River salmon through the hydro system by the use of salmon spill. And if we keep growing it and perfecting it, we'll get better. The federal dam system has been significantly rebalanced to produce salmon as well as kilowatts. Today's settlement agreement contains another step forward in that. Salmon spill is simple in principle, it's complex in application. The principle is when you've got dams in a river, especially a series of dams, operate them so to the maximum extent possible, the fish are not being handled mechanically or humanly. They're not being delayed. They're not being forced into behaviors outside their evolution, like being put in barges. That your human and mechanical impingement on them is kept as minimal as possible as they get through these dams. That means dropping over the tops of dams in water that then resumes for them down there. It's the safest way to get salmon over dams and out of powerhouses and turbines and pipes and tubes and all screens and all that other stuff. We needed 4 things to get spill over these years, in my view. We needed the Endangered Species Act salmon listings, because without them, we had no basis to sue. And that gave tribes and others, ourselves, the ability to sue for salmon, safer salmon hydro operations. It was never going to be implemented voluntarily by the dam agencies, so that forceful legal lever was just essential. The second strand, and it's really several strands, was science. We needed hard scientific data that made the case salmon spill would increase salmon and steelhead survivals on a life cycle basis. And we needed science that could measure if that spill, when it was given by court injunction, was actually working. That science came from several directions, but the major one was this enormous 40-year-long scientific enterprise built around the Fish Passage Center and the survival studies that has by now tracked tens of millions of juvenile salmon, mostly by pit tagging, through the federal and some of the private dams in virtually every variation of season and water year and temperature, human mechanical handling versus lack thereof, species, etc., and track their survival of the ones who did to return as adults. The result is this vast amount of empirical data that analyzed statistically reveals which operations and conditions produce the highest salmon survivals when you reach a big dam. That data has convinced courts to rely on it, and they've been rewarded because the reliance has been rewarded by empirical evidence showing it's working. It's rebutted the dam manager's reliance on heavy-handed practices like barging, and it's led to a steady reduction in those practices. And it's instructed managers how to do spill in ever finer grain for given conditions and dams. The third strand has been coalition power and people power. They overlap, but they're different. And they've been needed again because of that resistance from the federal dam agencies and most of their electricity customers. If you get a win in court, it can be stalled, delayed, or even not done if there's resistance out there in the federal dam agencies. So it's been necessary in every sort of arena, whether it's court or a governor's office or a senator's office, to show broad support for spill in a coalition sense, or the package it's part of. Simpson's concept is an example of this, both removing the lower snake dams and salmon spill are in his proposal. In SOS, spill was a great unifier because it increases survival of every salmon and steelhead, hatchery or wild, Columbia or snake, Chinook or sockeye or steelhead or coho. And so it was supported by every fishing constituency in the Northwest and up to Alaska and down to Northern California. Every conservation constituency I'm aware of, native and white constituencies, people, coalition power came together, and that mattered in court and in the politics. From a distance and with much less knowledge than I have about salmon, I see the orca salmon connection similarly. I'm less interested, I know less about the science of it, but the law, the science, the broad public support, the broad coalition support, the alliance of tribes and non-tribal folks, all those elements that play on spill are at play in orca and the orca salmon connection. And thank God they are, because we're gonna have to deploy them in the next 9 months to get where we need to be. The we has grown. Again, it's the same message that I keep saying over and over. So science plays that role. You know, it's within a wider strategy that science can pay off in a shorter period rather than the over time of science that can someone, oh yeah, looking back in retrospect, we were wrong to let those salmon go extinct. That's science too, but applying science to get things done is a realm that requires those other supporting pillars to move that agenda, especially when it's a hard, tough agenda.
I'll just chime in to say that, you know, when you're talking about spill, you know, Pat very clearly outlined the plethora of science that showed that it was a winner for the fish across many different species. But tying it in with people power, it's also just a no-brainer, right? And so like that was the piece that I think helped gain some political momentum, is that the average person can just empirically understand that taking fish out of the river, putting them in barges and porting, or trucks even, and driving them around the dams made about as much sense as putting geese on a 747 and sending them home, you know, flying them home for the winter. And the science backed it up, but it was just such an easy thing to convey out to the public that it really garnered a huge amount of public support, which then created political pressure on decision makers and elected officials in a way that just reading a scientific report wouldn't have done. But we needed the science to be able to generate that people power. But I think the two worked really closely in lockstep together.
And I'm going to jump in on a subject that Pat touched on briefly, which was whoops, I've lost it again. But having to do with the orca. The orca is an issue, and one of the things that's exciting about I mean, it's a very sad but exciting moment is that the fact that we finally figured out with the orca mother carrying her baby, her dead baby around, that the Snake River salmon have something to do with the orca, and the people on the west side of Washington, where most of the people, most of the economic power, most of the political power of the region resides, actually have an interest. And we had a very hard time for years getting people in the Puget Sound area interested in Columbia River salmon because it wasn't their river, it wasn't their salmon. We got this here, and this then moves into my issue of a sense of humor and thick skin, because we, the Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition, did get the Seattle City Council to adopt a resolution that said we'll take out the dams. It was we worked hard on that, and it made the people in Eastern Washington very angry, and I have one paragraph that I'm going to read you from an editorial, which I think is just hysterical, and is part of the sense of humor and thick skin that you need. Because here's what the editorialist said about me, because I was one of the people who had helped get this. Seattle City Council said the imperious Patton does not condescend, or excuse me, the imperious Patton does condescend to Eastern Washington to the point that she would consent to being approached by the rubes and rabble and would permit them to kiss her ring and bring their case before her. She even indicated that she might accept invitations from the villagers so that she might see for herself what the dams mean to the natives. Perhaps we could perform a native dance for her and give her native clothes to take back and show her friends. A pair of coveralls, for example. We could even show off our flushing toilets to her. Now, I don't know about you. I think that's hysterical. I think it's witty and funny. And, you know, I'm Imperious Patton. But you need to be able to live with that humor and slide it off your back. And you need to be able to get the Seattle City Council to adopt resolutions. And I will note that the City Council has never rescinded that resolution, so it's still good resolution law. But that's one of the things that you have to do in order to get through 20 years of this kind of a campaign.
I think I'm right here, Sarah, that resolution included language about replacement of the services the dams provided. And I think I just want to note that, because that was an important part of the conversation that salmon advocates, SOS and otherwise, have been encouraging that kind of conversation, that comprehensive approach, which has been resisted, of course, for a long time, and then took such significant move forward earlier this year under the leadership of Mr. Simpson. So I just wanted to point that out. Other thoughts on science? Thank you, Sarah. I want to shift to energy, and we're going to, of course, go over time and only be able to touch on these topics shallowly. But I want to turn to energy because it's such a central aspect of this conversation. It's already been talked about quite a bit in terms of the power, the political power, the dollars. But Sarah, you led the Northwest Energy Coalition. LeeAnne, of course, you worked in that space as well. And Pat, you've got lots of energy chops too. Can you just talk a little bit about how that that the significance of energy, how that landscape's changed over time, because it has changed, in profound ways in the last 5, 10, 15 years, and what that means.
Yeah, although I will say one of the early moments of keeping the coalition together was that one of the first analyses of what energy one could use to replace the dams was from an economist who said, well, we can replace it all with natural gas combustion turbines, which caused the Northwest Energy Coalition to say, no, that's not, we're not, whoops. So we had to work that out fast. So that meant that early on, the Northwest Energy Coalition in order to become a full partner in the campaign, had to assure itself and its members that there was clean and affordable energy to replace the power from the 4 lower snake dams. Luckily, that turned out to be, with excellent analysis by neutral parties, to be we were assured, we the Northwest Energy Coalition were assured by a number of studies, both by ourselves and by others, that there was clean and affordable energy to replace it. I think the other thing that's important about it is that the political power of the electric utilities that buy from Bonneville, which is the entity that gets all the power from the 4 lower snake dams and from the rest of the federal dams in the system, is enormous in the state of Washington. It's enormous in the region. Bonneville was the one of probably the most powerful of the federal agencies in this campaign so far. So dealing with the energy issues, absolutely critical, and also very hard. It's changed over time, in that there have been moments when it looked like maybe a little bit of energy, of natural gas combustion turbines would be okay if they were going to replace coal. But now that we've dealt with most of the coal in the region, we're certainly not. No natural gas needed. And once again, the analyses, the solid neutral and analysts look at the subject. There's plenty of power to replace the dams, the power from the dams and from the other coal plants and so on and so forth that we need to retire in order to have safety for salmon, but safety for all the rest of us as well. So energy has been really important, both politically and because it's a critical element of making sure we've got that we in the coalition, in the broad coalition of Save Our Wild Salmon, know that we've got a very reasonable and, as I say, clean and affordable power is there to replace that very important aspect of it, of the dam services. So,
thanks, Sarah. Additional thoughts? Climate, for example? I mean, the profile of climate, in the time I've been there since the 90s, it was a conversation, but it's transformed in various ways, including its undeniable impact on the Northwest and everywhere else, and it's getting worse.
I think an important point about the climate is that people immediately go to, well, why are we taking these dams out? Because they're carbon neutral, right? But, as we've shown, as Sarah said, there's been multiple studies that show that we can replace that power with clean, affordable, other sources of renewable energy. I always flip the question back around. In a climate warmed river, we need to do everything we can to give these salmon a fighting chance. We know that hot water is lethal to fish, 68 degrees, and they're cooking in it. And in these slack water reservoirs, they're just tubs of hot water that are lethal to fish. And we've seen in the news summer after summer the big fish kills, on the Columbia River and sometimes in the Snake as well. And salmon are resilient, right? They will come back if we give them the habitat in which to do it. And if we can remove the dams and have a free flowing, cooler, more natural river, then we're setting salmon up for success as the climate will continue to warm. You know, we know that, you know, we're doing everything we can to slow it down, but at this point, you know, there's going to be impacts. We're trying to halt it, but we're also into adaptation and mitigation now. So we have to think about what do we need to do to make this river habitable as the water gets warmer naturally. And one of the biggest things we can do is take out these dams. And so it's just flipping it around and saying, it's like, well, because of climate change, we have to take out the dams, I think is a really powerful argument.
Pat, a couple quick thoughts, and then
I'll just add, I think, on the politics. I mean, the politics have changed when you get to the place of, okay, we're writing legislation, folks. And hopefully we're nearing that place. I think it is nearly impossible, highly unlikely, that people like Patty Murray, Mike Simpson, and Ron Wyden, and Jay Inslee, and Kate Brown, and Earl Blumenauer are going to be for and help pass a bill that makes energy matters worse for people in the Northwest, not better, and that makes our climate change challenge, both the resilience and the get rid of the carbon challenge, which have to be put together, makes them worse. They'll probably have some things in this bill a bunch of us don't like at all, but I'm almost positive that one of them will not be the hell with the utilities. We're just going to move ahead. So I think we're in good shape with the politics to make sure that the real, genuine concerns around energy are addressed by these leaders with the real facts, numbers, analysis, and path to get there that we know is needed and has been developed on paper from a number of sources by now. So I think our messengers about reassuring people about energy supply suddenly aren't us. I think they're going to be at bigger levels, and I think they'll be effective messengers.
Thanks, Pat.
I'm assuming several things about where those folks are headed. Less assumption with Simpson than with Murray, but I just think they're going to be stalwarts to make sure this is not done wrong on the energy side and not done wrong on the climate side, but done right on the salmon side.
Okay. I'm just going to mention, because there's a question in the chat on this, that right now in the Northwest and around the country, the energy efficiency has been so successful that we have electric utilities who have, the Seattle City Light, for example, has had either flat or declining loads, even with all of them, and most of you know that there's been just massive amounts of new construction in Seattle, but even with all that new construction, the electricity use has either stayed flat or gone down in the last 6 years. Now, that should probably start changing a bit as the campaign to move people off of direct use of natural gas and direct use of, there's not all that much direct use of oil, but some direct use of oil, so that there should be some increase. But basically, there's less pressure right now on the all generation, but certainly on the dams. And the Bonneville Power Administration is worrying that its publicly owned utilities are not going to sign up to buy power from it. So that puts that takes the pressure off of the 4 Lower Snake dams, thank goodness. And it's, I mean, I started off in energy efficiency, so I'm thrilled that energy efficiency is making those changes. But it makes the power community nervous in general, because they don't see what the future exactly is going to be, and they have to put big investments out there to meet the needs of their customers. So that has been very interesting as a background for especially the dam removal and spill, because spill obviously, well, I don't know if this is obvious, but spill reduces the amount of power that you can get out of the system as well. Not as much as taking out the dams, but
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to ask one more question, LeeAnne, to you to start, and then we'll switch to a Q&A with the audience. And I've been not able to look at the chat or Q&A coming through yet, but I will turn to that shortly. So LeeAnne, it's been talked about in a number of contexts, and I want to sort of ask you the question about people power. We've got litigation, we've got sort of scientists, but can you just sort of talk a little bit about your views on the importance, the value, the role of people organizing and mobilizing?
Absolutely. That's the issue that's nearest and dearest to my heart, because people are what make change, right? And so, focusing on salmon recovery and honoring tribal treaty rights are important to people all across the Northwest, but also around the country. And it's only grown in the last 30 years. Sarah mentioned the cycles of litigation, where every 5 years we'd get a court case that would say, redo the salmon plan, and the government would go off and redo the salmon plan, and it would be as abjectly terrible as it was the previous 5 years. And then sometimes there'd be a round of hearings around it. And I just remember the round of hearings on the draft environmental impact statement for the hydro system in the year 2000. And we had 13 hearings in different cities in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Alaska. And we were focused on operating the river for fish, including removing the 4 lower Snake River dams as the preferred option for the government to move forward with salmon recovery. And I know I saw some of the folks in the attendee list, some of you worked on these hearings with us. And I tried to actually find my hearing report that I wrote up after these hearings, because I was the acting field director while I was working as the associate director for SOS, and I could not find it. But I can tell you just from memory that I know that over 1,000 people turned out in Seattle. We had 100 boat parade of sport fishing boats in Portland that shut down the freeway because there was not enough room to get all of them off the freeway and into the hearing site in time. There were commercial fishermen that came out in Juneau, Sitka, Ketchikan, Petersburg. We had community activists and concerned citizens in Spokane and Idaho Falls and Boise. We had environmentalists and conservationists in Missoula and Helena and everywhere else. And it was just this incredible outpouring of support for these fish and the political actions that we needed to take to restore the river. As Pat already said, though, the government's reaction to that was like, yeah, so what? Which was difficult, but we persevered. And over the next few years, SOS helped write and introduce a piece of legislation called the Salmon Planning Act, which would have provided for official scientific analysis commissioned by the federal government, order all these pre-dam removal studies, and actually authorize the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to take out the dams. And that bill ended up getting, I can't remember the exact number, but it was over like 110, 115 co-sponsors from 23 or 30 different states. And we were organizing in those states across the country. And it wasn't just people here in the Northwest that cared. They were contacting their elected officials. They were writing letters to the editor, op-eds. We had scores of editorials published around the country because people were clamoring, like, what's going on in the Northwest? This is a big deal. This bill's moving in Congress. We heard about these hearings, and people just care. They really do care. And I remember sitting in a meeting with Representative Tom Petri in his office in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. He was the other lead sponsor of the Salmon Planning Act, along with Representative Jim McDermott, who was a Democrat here from Washington State. And it was particularly meaningful to me because I had been from Wisconsin, and Tom Petri had been my representative when I was in high school living in Wisconsin. And here he was still in Congress, being a leader on an issue I cared passionately about. And so I brought in some folks that I knew in Wisconsin. I brought in my friends who cared about this issue. And so he had a room full of constituents hearing from him about how glad they were that he'd taken a position on this issue. And I do draw some parallels between Tom Petri and Jim McDermott working on this issue, 25 years ago, and Representative Simpson from Idaho, and our Washington Governor Jay Inslee and Senator Patty Murray, who are, again, two ends of the political spectrum, Republicans and Democrats, showing that this can and should be a bipartisan issue. And, just seeing the stakeholder processes that have been underway here in the Northwest, both the one run in Washington by Governor Inslee and the 4-state one that's going on now, that is now morphing into these new proposals. It really is making it clear that whether you're a fisherman or a farmer or a rancher or a tribal member or a person of faith or a Sierra Club activist, people see the connections again between all of these issues and want their elected officials to take action. And they're not shy about saying so. We just had another whole round of, once again, Army Corps of Engineers hearings during the pandemic that were held by telephone. And if you think a federal hearing is bad enough, when you have to attend one by telephone, that is a challenging thing to do. But again, people turned out, our folks turned out, you turned out, and made your voices heard and are really making it clear the urgency of now, right? Like, we have an opportunity at this precise moment that I don't feel like we've had for the last 20 years, honestly. When back, 20 years ago, we had the big round of hearings in the Salmon Planning Act. Right now, we've had these stakeholder processes. We have the Simpson proposal. We have Inslee and Murray putting their package together. We have to strike while the iron's hot right now. And so it is not a time to get complacent. It's a time to be inspired, to be motivated, to be talking to your friends and your neighbors, to really tap into that people power. And, as I always say, like, I was out making presentations in hundreds of houses of worship over the last 16 years, a lot of them on this issue with Earth Ministry. And, whatever you have a part to play is what I would say to folks. It's like, find the piece that speaks to you. Is it the moral imperative of protecting the species from going extinction? Is it, honoring tribal treaty rights? Is it making sure your grandkids can go fishing? Whatever it is, like, people get that. Do you love orcas and, want to see the majestic orcas jumping in Puget Sound? It really touches people's hearts. And if you touch people's hearts, they are willing to step up and take action. And that's where we are again right now. It's come full circle. It's the long road, but we're here again now. And I really believe that we have an incredible opportunity if we only, keep the pressure on and continue to mobilize our folks. Everybody on this webinar, like, you have people that and can help put pressure on our elected officials to take this seriously and take some action.
Sarah, Pat, any quick follow-on thoughts to LeeAnne before we transition? I'll make one. I'll challenge only on one point, LeeAnne, quickly, and then we'll transition to Q&A. And that is, I don't think we've been here before. We're in a new place where the administration is leaning in, and political leadership in the region is leaning in, and those are two essential ingredients to taking this across the finish line in a way that works for the region. And in that regard, everything else you said makes absolute sense. This is our moment to mobilize and engage and bring others in.
Yeah, and I would agree that the political climate is far more positive now for exactly the reasons you articulated. I think that there's the people power it has come full circle. That's more of what
Yeah.
I was referring to. It's like we have built power over the last 30 years, and I think now is the time that we can really push it across the finish line.
So we're going to turn to Q&A, and Pat, LeeAnne, Sarah, just so you know, we'll do a set of questions. They might jump around a little bit in topic, and as at the end, you'll each have a sort of moment, a couple of moments to sort of provide some concluding thoughts and reflections. So rather than sort of doing that now, let's jump into the Q&A, and we'll have that towards the end. A question from John Roberg. You all spoke of the importance of litigation for the survival of Columbia snake salmon, but the Simpson framework, if adopted as proposed, precludes litigation going forward in many contexts. Any comments? Question mark.
I can, yeah. Good question, tough question, not really answerable. Events will sort of answer it. There are things in Simpson's concept that I oppose. I cannot oppose his overall point that in order to succeed in passing legislation in the actual 2021-22 Congress, there will be compromises I don't like. And so I think his message is think hard about the ones you really don't like versus, I mean, it's a tough thing, but he's right. And I'm assuming any proposals that come from other congressional sources of the caliber of Oregon and Washington senators, congressmen, and governors is going to have the same dynamic operating. Individually, what I'm doing is looking at those things and trying to figure out ways of either, reducing them or supporting them if they're reduced or whatever. I also am accepting that I'm not going to have a lot to say about it. Organizations are going to have to look at their bottom lines in this regard. And if I were deep into this issue in some organizations, I'm not sure I'd do that job publicly, but I'd sure do it, of trying to get clear bottom lines and least harmful bad things, that sort of stuff. In the end, the politicians will put it together on their calculus. One thing I'll mention that ties back to the other thing, it's not an answer to your question, John, but it's a part of what we have to do, is that the more power we can build and the more people power and coalition power we can exert, the less room folks who want really awful positions will have with these elected leaders who are representing publics that they are hearing from. That doesn't mean there won't be bad compromises, but it reduces the area for those compromises. It doesn't make sense to go into it here, but there are some compromises I would not accept. Again, I don't think I will influence things much, but just as an individual. And there may be some that organizations will decide they can't accept. And we will see where that goes. It's the push and pull of politics. And we're about to get real in that push and pull, I hope. And getting real means facing hard choices, in part.
Thanks, Pat. LeeAnne or Sarah?
Well, and I guess the other one to note is that the proposal to extend the length of relicensing for non-federal dams, because the federal dams don't have to get for licenses in front of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC as it is fondly known. So that's a really interesting and difficult one for any number of folks. So I mean, there are a lot of compromises that we're going to have to look through as we go forward with whatever comes. I mean, Simpson has put forward a proposal, and there are going to be more. So we'll be looking at them.
Maybe I should just sharpen it up. I mean, I think we have individual responsibilities to look at the trade-offs we're being asked to think about and say yes or no to them in ourselves. And so I think everyone in this meeting has an, if you're going to talk to Senator Murray or Governor Inslee or whoever, make sure you tell them what you don't want to see in this bill in addition to what you do want to see. Organizations will have to do the same thing, and then we will see what happens. And it'll be what it is, and we will face, hopefully others will be facing the same hard, can we do this or can we not?
Next question to any of you, maybe start with Sarah. There's a couple of questions from Terry and Debbie around, sort of what is the mix of renewable energy resources and in the power generation issues that people are hearing about, wanting to make sure that they've got their heat in the winter and their AC in the summer, and there's not rolling blackouts. Just any thoughts about sort of the energy piece of the equation here?
Well, I was looking at those questions too, and I went back to look at a few of the analyses. Back when we did Bright Future, which is several years ago, it was one of the earlier analyses of where the clean and affordable energy was. We were talking about meeting the needs for electricity. New needs for electricity with about 85% from energy efficiency. In fact, we've met more than 100% with energy efficiency because loads have gone down. So energy efficiency is going to continue to be the big contributor. I firmly believe. But at the same time, wind and solar have come down. People are getting interested in direct application of solar. The prices definitely come down. There's some very exciting new work in batteries. There's some iron-based batteries that new articles are telling us that lovely Wilsonville, Oregon, is going to be working on some. So these are the kinds of batteries that you would put at the base of a windmill. They're not. You wouldn't put an iron-based battery in your car; it's too big. But it could be the thing that does the storage that makes wind and solar even more useful in meeting load growth, because, as we know, the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun goes down. But basically, it's going to be wind and solar, and the first resource will be energy efficiency, and then those two. And I'm just very optimistic about that.
I want to second the shout out for energy efficiency, because when I first started at the Energy Coalition, one of the first things that Sarah taught me was there's no cleaner, cheaper kilowatt than one you don't have to produce. So that's the first and foremost thing we should be focusing on, is reducing demand and energy efficiency.
Well said, LeeAnne. Pat?
I'd like to make a political point that bears on this question. I've probably been hard on Bonneville Power and the Army Corps. Remember, I was talking mostly 30 years ago, although they are carrying some of the very same sins right now. But the political opportunity, I think today's administration announcement shows it. Bonneville and the Army Corps now have a political opportunity to maintain their missions for energy and navigation, but bring salmon into those missions in whatever way it happens. I think there's an opportunity for those agencies to reclaim some of the ground of trust and respect they have lost with salmon people, while making sure that the energy side that they know well is dealt with properly in any legislation that changes the nature of the hydro system. So I hope that the Biden administration announcement means that perhaps Bonneville and the Army Corps are thinking about an opportunity here in addition to a worry or threat.
Thanks, Pat. A quick just flag for people. We may not get to all the questions that are getting served up because we're going to run out of time. I hope everyone knows how to get a hold of me. I'm happy to talk or email with you afterwards if you come away and feel unsatisfied and want to talk further. So keep that in mind. You can reach me at joseph@wildsalmon.org. Our friend Fred Hewitt has a question about the Columbia Basin Fish Accords. 2008 was when they began. And he describes it as sort of a divide and rule approach that the federal family has employed in response to litigation. Comments?
Well, I think the situation is different now with the tribes. Their relationships with Bonneville and Bonneville money, I will leave to each of the tribes to work out that. But I think the Northwest tribes and the Columbia River Treaty tribes are united in endorsing Simpson's concept, which I suspect doesn't mean they endorse everything with the same amount of enthusiasm, but they see a vehicle that they believe should start to move. And so I am, I'm focused on the tribal unity. That is the reality today, led by some tribes more than others, but it's tribal unity at the Northwest level. I think it's great. I mean, they deserve a lot of credit for finding that sort of unity. It is not easy, but they have, and that's where I'm focused moving forward. The Accords are history from my point of view, and I don't want to revisit it in this meeting right
now. On that point of around unity, I'll just sort of flag a couple of quick details to sort of flesh that out, which is I think it's the 57 tribes of the Pacific Northwest, the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, passed a unanimous resolution earlier this year, basically in support of the Simpson proposal and dam removal to protect these fish from extinction and recover them. And then that's basically that same resolution went to the national level, the National Congress of American Indians, and was passed, if not unanimously, darn near there too. And those were, I think, firsts regionally and nationally, and significant signs of the unity, Pat, you were just talking about. Looking at the questions, Lori Odie asked a question about, it goes back to energy, which isn't surprising because it's import. Is it not true that most power from the dams is not needed? It contributes to a surplus that is sold at a loss out of region. And because the dams are run a river, the power they produce comes when it's not needed most. Do you want to respond to that sort of question about the value and power of the dam, of the energy produced by the Lower Snake?
Well, that's a definitely educated question. The most of the power from the 4 Lower Snake dams comes on the spring freshet, when the snow's melting in the mountains and we have lots of hydroelectricity in the entire system. That's when the Washington Public Power Supply System, formerly known as WHOOPS and now known as Energy Northwest, turns off the nuclear plant so that it can fix things up, because there's so much hydropower that's available. So, and that's when most of the power from the 4 Lower Snake dams comes in. So it's not worth a whole lot, and it's not hugely helpful to the region, but it is, I mean, it's real. I don't want to say that it's not. It does make a contribution. The important thing is that there's plenty of clean and affordable energy to replace it, is basically what it comes down to. Not only for the power, but also for the other elements. So maintaining a balance in the system and preventing any kinds of power drops and transmission issues. So it's a good question, and I'm glad I got to say a little bit about how it's just the spring freshet.
In 2018, I think someone's alluded to this, the Northwest Energy Coalition retained the services of a well-respected energy analyst based in Salt Lake City to produce an analysis to answer that question. And that is available at the NWEC website. It's also available on the SOS website, including fact sheets if you don't want to read the whole darn report, because it's quite substantive and it's energy, for gosh sake. But those questions have been looked at, and as Sarah just said, answered, I think, with great confidence about the replaceability. Here's sort of a different topic that I like, that I want to ask about. Terry's asking about how the removal of the Elwha River Dam, so a success story. and the recovery of the river has impacted the work to remove the dams on the Lower Snake River. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's obviously been helpful. I mean, the efforts to restore Elwha salmon by removing 2 dams there, efforts to restore Klamath River salmon by removing 4 dams there, efforts to restore Snake River salmon by removing 4 dams there, and other examples have all been part of some of the same impulses coming from people, from tribes, from users, etc. There has been somewhat deliberate effort by the various conservation and tribal folks involved in these things to keep them separate so that we don't get their politics tangled up while trying to make their similarities of fact and so forth clear. But there's no doubt they're part of something of the same things happening. And to me, what it indicates is the amazing opportunity the Northwest has to become the world leader in restoring large chunks of river and seeing what happens. I bet it will be neat things that happen economically, environmentally, ecologically, justice-wise. I think it's going to be a lot to the good, but that's something this region could embrace, I think, and get behind. So I think Elwha is an example to everyone working on similar issues with salmon in this region.
LeeAnne or Pat? I mean, sorry, LeeAnne or Sarah?
Elwha, woohoo!
An inspirational success story.
So
it took 20 years. That's another lesson from Elwha. It took over 20 years. It took a long time.
Yeah.
But it got.
Yeah, I don't know whether I was asking Carrie if I could have my pictures of my nephew Connor up on shared on this on the webinar, because persistence is part of it. One of the things that Sean Cantrell, who many of you know, and who was deeply involved in the Elwha, well, that was one of the things that he said when Save Our Wild Salmon was first considering whether it would advocate removal of the dams. Oh, there's Connor now. And where's Connor before? There's Connor with Buster. And who is that inside Buster? Is that Sam and me? And those dams don't make sense. This is the year 2000. We're at a hearing on the biological opinion and the draft environmental impact statement. So Connor was small enough that I could hold him in my arms. And then can we have Connor today? Again, there's Connor today. So a strapping lad. And that just shows you that persistence is part of the deal. It took 20 years for the Elwha, and we're over 20 for the 4 Lower Snake dams, but you know, it's going to happen. So we persist.
Well, Sarah, I have my own persistence story too. So if you'll indulge me, Joseph, just one moment. So this is a rock that I keep on my desk that I picked up off of the Lower Granite Dam on 9/9/99. So that was when we were doing tours out at the dam for elected officials and reporters around the region. Wild Angels and some other volunteer pilots were flying people in from all over the region to come land and get a tour on the ground. So Jim Baker and I, those of you who are old hands and remember Jim Baker from the Sierra Club, and I were on the ground that day being the folks who were giving the tour. And I thought to myself, well, it's a pretty important date, 9/99/99. And so I picked up this rock and I told myself that I would keep this on my desk until the dams were removed. And I actually went into my office yesterday to get this off of my desk to bring it in for this webinar, because I fully intend to take this rock back to a free-flowing Snake River, write the date that the dam is out, and put this back in the river and let it go. And that's going to be like my story of persistence. So until then, here it is.
Thank you, LeeAnne. I'm I'm just attentive a little bit to the time, so I want to do a couple more questions and then wrap. And one I'm going to ask and then answer myself, because it's I think I'm best positioned to. Scott Maxwell asked, does SOS have a schedule of events where people can participate to bring pressure and attention to the salmon issue? And the answer is absolutely. Hopefully you're sort of in our on our list already and receive emails from us. I will use this opportunity also to highlight a series of events that are in the works right now to recognize the anniversary, the 30-year anniversary of the listing of Snake River sockeye coming up in November of this year, November 20th. And there are a set of events that are being organized. The details are still being worked out, but I think we'll be reaching out with those details as soon as we have them around the Northwest. That Scott, hopefully you and others on this call can mobilize, attend, and bring others into. I think, again, getting back to LeeAnne's point about people power and mobilization, now is the time to lean in like never before for various reasons. One of which is the political window of opportunity before us right now. So if you have other questions, Scott, feel free to reach out to me. I want to turn to sort of a couple of questions I'm going to bring together around politics in Washington State. One question begins whether she actually said it or not, and I actually think she did. Senator Murray is credited with saying Democrats built these dams and Democrats are going to keep them. And until now, Washington's senior senator has been frustratingly evasive when it comes to dam removal. How do we achieve our goal when the same players from the past continue to kick the can down the road? But before answering that, I just want to sort of follow on with another question from down below, from Tom Stewart, Sarah and LeeAnne, probably. Washington state polls, especially Inslee, Murray, Cantwell, are keys to success. What's needed now to move them farther along? Slightly different questions, but related. Washington politics. Sarah, LeeAnne?
Well, I think that the senator is going to be moved by once again people power, and as well as the strength of the coalition, and the issue of that's finally gotten them thinking this is a Washington issue with the orca. And so I think there's movement. And any, even if you do think Democrats built the dams, that doesn't mean that Democrats have to, die on the dams, I guess.
I would agree that orcas have really brought a full circle statewide perspective to this issue that, folks have been very concerned and focused on salmon and dams and habitat, but when you bring in the orcas, there's that extra just hook that is just so quintessentially the west side of the state that it brings together the two sides of the state in a way that just hasn't been seen on this campaign so far. So that is really gaining some traction. I think that continuing hearing from the different people and trying to understand what the levers are and the power amongst the stakeholders has been very important and move the needle on the political side as well. But, again, I would just agree with Sarah. It's good old fashioned people power. I would be remiss in who I am if I didn't point out that Martha has posted in the chat the action items on the Save Our Wild Salmon website. And Martha, if you would to throw that out there again, there's 5 different actions that you can take. And the very first one is reaching out to Murray and Inslee and asking them to release their salmon plan immediately and not wait a year to roll it out. So it's that kind of relentless, thoughtful power, endless power, relentlessly applied that is going to make the politicians finally move. And I think, honestly, Joseph, you made this point earlier, like, having an administration that is open to having these conversations is key. That's a different, we're in a different place right now when, we have some Democratic leaders here in our state that are hearing positively reinforcing messages. So I think that is a unique situation that we have not had as clearly before in the past, and we should take advantage of. So please share the action page.
Pat, any quick thoughts?
No.
The one I'll add is there's a number of things that have changed over time that is, I think, forcing Senator Murray to change, and a big one is justice and tribes, and I think we all have a role to play in ensuring that a responsibility that our nation upholds the promises it made to tribal people over 150 years ago. And so in that regard, we have an obligation to be active and wherever we can support and elevate the voices of tribal people in this battle. So I want to transition again. We haven't gotten to all the questions, and I apologize, but I do want to transition. A couple of these are sort of speed questions. And I asked you guys to prepare a little bit for this. First of all, LeeAnne, Sara, Pat, can you name one book and one sentence why about it, why it's important, just for the audience, if you want to dive into this issue in any of various ways. LeeAnne?
I have my book right here. It is First Fish, First People. Salmon Tales of the North Pacific Rim, and it's an anthology of poems and chantings and essays and writings, all by Indigenous writers, focused on salmon and the meaning that they hold to the Indigenous peoples of the Pacific Rim. And it is beautiful photos, powerful stories, and it'll really help you understand exactly what Joseph said about the power of the tribal perspective.
Sara?
Called Thrush's relatively new book that's a history of basically the Puget Sound area, and it's got salmon are part of it, but talking about just reading that book and understanding a bit more about the history of the Puget Sound area made me remember that it's how recent the European incursion is, and how important the native folks are, as well as obviously the salmon. So,
can you repeat the name of that? I missed it.
His name, the author is Carl Thrush, THRUSH, and the first name is COLL. And I'm sorry, Joseph, I didn't write down but it's a very recent history.
Maybe Martha can research it and throw it in the notes, the chat, if she's been doing a really good job all the webinar. Pat, a book?
I'll recommend A River Lost by Blaine Harden. This is an old book. It's one of the first ones written about the tangle with dams and salmon. The reason I'm recommending it is that when Mike Simpson wrote it, I'm told this, his first reaction was, whoa, what have I gotten myself into? This is going to be really hard. And of course, he was right about that and is right about that. It's a book to read if you want to get some sense of the opposition to restoring the lower Snake River and its grounding and force 20 some odd years ago. There's a recent interview with Blaine in which he says, go get them on removing the dams. And he has some confidence about that at this point. But reading this book gives you a sense of the large enterprise that it has been and still is to try to get this done.
LeeAnne, Sara, Pat, one person in this work over time that you hold in especially high regard that inspires you?
Well, I can say Pat Ford for sure. And Don Sampson. I meant to mention him earlier. An amazing man who was head of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. He done all kinds of work. He came and spoke to the Northwest Energy Coalition board and probably had the biggest impact on that group of folks to say that yes, we will engage in this issue by telling them stories, including a wonderful story that many of you have heard him tell about some little critters who dam up the river and have to be put in their place in order to have the river work for everybody. And it's a wonderful story. So Don was very, very inspirational and did hard work.
Don Sampson is a Umatilla tribal member.
Yep.
LeeAnne?
I'm going to cheat and just say that my person is the people who have all worked so hard and taken action on this issue over the last 30 years plus, because we would not be where we are without that people power. So, you know, my person is the people. I'm just grateful.
Thank you.
I know Pat laughs at me. I'm a one-trick pony, Pat. It's a really
I'm laughing
good trick,
with you. Yeah.
It's a really good trick. I'm all outreach all the time. You can't stop it.
No, nor would I wish to. I'm going to cheat too. I'm going to mention two. One is just recent inspiration as opposed to what got me in this in the first place. A year and a half ago, I knew him before, but I met a man named Bill Platts, 94 years old. He remembers fishing for salmon in the 30s up in the headwaters of the Salmon River. He is still a working scientist. He's a scientist by trade. He's an amazing man for 94 years old. He was over on the Oregon coast fishing for salmon just the other day. I cleverly forgot the little link to a 5-minute video with him, but if anyone wants to email me, I did my address. I will get you the name of that link. He's an amazing guy. And the other person I'll name is on this call, and it's Lori Odie, a recent volunteer from my perspective on this issue in Boise that I've worked with. And she has done so much work to get letters to Crapo, to get letters to Governor Little, to get letters to the editor here and there and everywhere to build this issue and involve her friends and new people. It's the kind of thing that needs to happen in all sorts of places in the Northwest. I'm sure it is, but I know it's happening in Boise. A lot of it is due to her.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Lori. So I think we're getting close to concluding here. And I just want to give each of you in turn a minute or two to sort of reflect on this, conversation, where we are, where we go, sort of however you want to bring things to a close. So appreciate this evening together. I'll let you all figure out who's first.
Well, I'll jump in and just say that this has been great. But I'm really looking forward to when it's not a webinar and we can actually see each other and poke each other a little bit to get the right questions in. So I'll look forward to that very much. And meanwhile, just my heart leapt up this afternoon when I saw the because I'm not as closely involved. So while I had been hearing that something exciting might be happening, I didn't know what it was. And to see that, we've got the Biden administration as well as all the plaintiffs sitting down and saying, okay, let's work. This is huge, and I'm excited.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'll let Pat wrap up, so I'll go next. I've pretty much made my closing pitch like 3 different times now. So at the risk of, continuing to beat the dead horse, like the government beating its salmon plans to death, I'll just say that it's just been a privilege to work on this. I was sincere when I said that I'm inspired by the people, but, a lot of the people are here, they're out there, and this is an issue that when we win, it is going to be one of the most powerful things that humans have ever done. This is the biggest river restoration project in the West Coast. It's going to have reverberations through the economy, for our habitat, for our hearts and our souls. It's going to be a beautiful thing, right? And, you know, Tom has already said that he wants to go with me to the river to put both of our rocks in together. I invite all of us, like, let's all go together. Like, it's going to be such a powerful moment to see those dams come down. And I just can't wait to do it with all of you.
I don't think I have any great things further to say. I appreciate folks who have listened. And Joseph, thank you for giving us this opportunity. And this is a 9-month deal. That's how I view it. We have to have legislation moving by July or so in order to pass Congress by the end of 2022, in order to avoid the next Congress, which we may not find to our liking. So we got 9 months. You know, let's hit it. Let's do it.
Ready, go.
Thank you all so much. It's just been a great conversation. And I'm so glad to have been able to do it with you, and to share you in some sense with the people that have been listening in, given your commitment and expertise and friendship and smarts and persistence and collaboration, all the things we've been talking about. So thank you so much. I want to thank everyone who has been in attendance, who's still in attendance, and to just echo Pat's call to action, LeeAnne's call to action, Sarah's call to action. We have this moment in front of us right now. As to what just happened today, there's a bit of information on the SOS website. There's going to be more coming. There'll be news coverage tomorrow for sure, and I think there's also some more steps that they're going to move forward in the next few days. So further momentum. Stay tuned, and please, reach out and let's build from here. Thank you all so much, and good night.
Yeah, and hurry up! I'm 72, and I want these dams out before I go.
Thanks, everybody.
Take good care.